They framed her, laughed in her face, and thought she was gone for good, until she walked back in as their new boss. They didn't even wait for the hallway to clear. For uniformed officers, men and women, Leah Ramirez used to mentor, stormed into her office at 10:42 a.m. on a Thursday. Their hands already rested on their cuffs like they'd been rehearsing this moment all morning. Leah Ramirez, one of them, barked louder than necessary. "You're under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and abuse of authority. No warrant, no explicación." Just cold stares and a camera crew waiting outside like it was some kind of show. She didn't argue, didn't scream, didn't even ask why. Leah simply looked at them, especially Officer Mason Cutter, who couldn't quite hide the smirk curling on his face. And then she stood up slowly, hands out in front of her. "Get on with it then." They walked her through the 6th District Precinct in Eugene, Oregon like she was a criminal. Her badge was still clipped to her hip, her service weapon still in its holster. No one said a word. The front desk sergeant turned away. A rookie she'd coached through firearms certification barely made eye contact. Everyone knew. Everyone had heard the whispers. Some had helped spread them. She'd served 21 years. Clean record. Dozens of commendations. High-profile cases. No suspensions. No internal investigations. Nothing. And now, suddenly, she was treated like a threat. Outside, the local media circled like vultures. Leah kept her chin up, but she could hear the cameras clicking and the reporters shouting their questions. "Is it true you stole narcotics from the evidence room, Captain Ramirez? Are you cooperating with the investigation?" She said nothing. She just got into the cruiser. This wasn't about justice. It was a message, and she understood it loud and clear. Mason Cutter slid into the back seat beside her. Not protocol, not necessary, but they weren't playing by the rules anymore. "You should have kept your nose out of things, Ramirez," he muttered, close enough she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Now look at you." "I was never afraid of the dark," she said quietly. "I just know it better than you do." He didn't reply, but the twitch in his jaw said enough. At the station, she was fingerprinted, photographed, and locked in a holding cell for 6 hours. Her lawyer wasn't allowed in until hour 4. It was deliberate. Time for the press to publish their stories. Time for the gossip to catch fire. By the time her attorney, Marcus Kane, finally walked in, she was already headline material. "Your file's been sealed," Marcus said as he sat across from her at the cold steel table. "No one's giving any details. But this whole thing stinks. Internal Affairs isn't even handling it. This came straight from the top of the district." Leah exhaled slowly. "You think it's Cutter?" Marcus nodded once. "Him and a few others. It's coordinated. They're covering something, and they're scared you'll dig it up." She stared at the wall. Not angry, not panicked, just quiet. She'd suspected for a while. Files going missing. Cases redirected without explanation. Evidence logs edited. And when she asked about it, they told her she was being paranoid. Now they made it clear. Asking questions was a risk. Being honest made her a target. But this wasn't just about her. There were victims out there. Cases that had been buried. People whose rights had been trampled because the wrong names were involved. If she was going down, she wasn't going alone. 6 hours later, they released her. No formal charges. No explicación. No apology. Just a file marked pending review, and a precinct full of officers who watched her leave like she was already guilty. She didn't say a word as she walked her car. But from the parking lot, she made one call. Not to family. Not to the press. To the mayor. "It's time," Leah said. "We need to talk. And I want everything on the table." For the next week, Leah Ramirez disappeared. No calls. No texts. No posts. No sightings. And the 6th District? They relaxed. Mason Cutter joked in the break room. "Maybe she finally realized she was never one of us," he said with powdered sugar on his fingers, half a donut hanging from his mouth. People laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they were afraid not to. Captain Frank Delaney, the one who signed off on her arrest, claimed he was just following protocol. But everyone knew he owed favors. Big ones. His sudden rise hadn't been quiet. And Leah had been the only one asking how. Without her, things were quieter. Files weren't questioned. Decisions weren't second-guessed. Cutter and his crew, officers who acted like they were above the law, became bolder. They clocked out early, shuffled calls to rookies, ignored reports, small things the public wouldn't notice. But Leah always had. Now no one filled that role, not even close. Outside the precinct, rumors swirled. A bartender at O'Malley's pub said he overheard two city clerks mention a meeting at City Hall. Something about federal involvement. Another rumor said Leah had been spotted in Salem, walking into the Department of Justice building. No one could confirm anything, but it was enough to make people squirm. Detective Jenna Cross, who had worked under Leah for 3 years, wasn't laughing with the rest. She kept her head down, ran her cases, stayed away from the gossip. But something didn't sit right. One afternoon, she found Mason Cutter standing at her desk, flipping through one of her case folders. "Didn't know this was your jurisdiction," he said, eyes on the file. "It's not," Jenna replied. "The lead witness asked for me." He closed the folder. "Watch yourself, Cross. You don't want to end up like Ramirez." Jenna didn't say anything. She took the file from his hand and walked away. But that night, she reread the last message Leah had ever sent her. "If anything happens, don't trust Cutter. Look deeper into the Mallory case. There's more than missing drugs. Start there." Jenna remembered the Mallory case. Ruled an overdose. Quietly closed. But Leah had always questioned the timeline. The broken evidence chain. The inconsistencies. Now, Jenna wasn't so sure she should have let it go. Meanwhile, Leah had taken a rental under an alias in Corvallis. No photos. No paper trail. Not hiding. Planning. A local tech firm owed her a favor. They built her a database of internal records. Cross-referenced incidents that had been buried, reclassified, or erased. What she found wasn't negligence. It was a pattern. The same names kept popping up: Cutter, Officer Ron Gaines, Sergeant Tom Avery, and Captain Frank Delaney. Excessive force. Missing evidence. Witness coercion. Dozens of victims. Some cases closed within hours. Others disappeared entirely. She printed every name, date, and complaint. She circled the overlaps. 27. This wasn't about getting her badge back. Not anymore. It was about taking down the system that protected predators in uniform. Back at the precinct, Cutter and his crew were planning their next celebration. They thought they'd won. They even planned drinks. Friday night. Called it a send-off to the witch hunt. Captain Delaney showed up in jeans and a button-down like it was his retirement party. Detective Cross stayed home. She spent the week pulling files on the Mallory case. Found something disturbing. Officer Gaines had been first on the scene, but there was no body cam footage. His log showed it had been active for 7 minutes. Never uploaded. She sent a request to tech. Then she sent an email to Leah. "I believe you. There's more to Mallory. Let me help." 20 minutes later, Leah replied, "Meet me Monday. Neutral ground. Come alone." The abandoned library on East Green Street hadn't seen life in years. But Jenna showed up early. Leah was already inside. They talked for hours. Cross brought printouts and statements. Leah brought a map of the entire corruption web. It wasn't just misconduct. It was a cover-up, 7 years deep. And while they pieced it together, the precinct was getting ready for a visitor. The courtroom was packed for Officer Cutter's pre-hearing. Just a formality. Cutter swaggered in, flanked by Delaney and Avery. Jenna sat in the back. Then the double doors opened again. Leah Ramirez walked in. Black suit, new badge gleaming. She handed a sealed envelope to the judge. The judge cleared his throat. "As of this morning, Leah Ramirez has been officially appointed as Internal Affairs Commander under federal authority with jurisdiction over the 6th District." Delaney stood. "This wasn't shared with the department." "It wasn't your call," the judge replied. "The DOJ is exercising emergency powers." Leah turned slowly. Calm. Steady. "Good morning," she said. "Starting today, I oversee every internal complaint, audit, and review tied to this district. I trust everyone's paperwork is in order." Silence. Cutter's smirk was gone. 3 days later, Leah posted a list on the notice board. Mandatory internal interviews, Week 1. Officer Ron Gaines. Detective Jenna Cross. Lieutenant Brian Vostek. Officer Mason Cutter. By 9 a.m., the building buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. The first interview was Gaines. "What happened at the Mallory scene?" Leah asked. He hesitated. "She was alive," he finally said. "I called it in. Cutter told me not to log it. Said it'd complicate things." "You willing to say that under oath?" He swallowed. "Yes." Later that week, Detective Cross brought in 2 thick folders. "Avery and Delaney," she said. "We've got forged memos. Fake arrests. Cases that never made it to court." Leah nodded. "How many people knew?" "At least 6, but only 3 gave the orders. Cutter, Avery, Delaney, and they were crumbling. By Friday, the DOJ issued arrest warrants." Cutter was pulled from his car outside a sandwich shop, still chewing his lunch. Avery's door was kicked in before sunrise. Delaney didn't even fight. He agreed to cooperate. 6 more officers followed in the next 24 hours. Leah watched from the precinct hallway as state vehicles lined up, officers in cuffs. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Later, she stood in front of the squad room. "Some of you were part of this. Some of you weren't. But all of you let it happen." Silence. "From now on, if you lie, you're out. If you cover for someone, you're gone. If you abuse the badge, you won't walk out of here with it again." Not a threat. A promise. But there was one last visit. County jail. Holding area. Mason Cutter behind glass. "You think this makes you a hero?" he asked. "No, it makes you the warning. You could have looked away," he muttered. "You could have made captain. By letting people like you poison the badge? No thanks." She tapped the folder in her hand against the glass. "This is every statement, every file, every name tied to you. I'm holding it to remind myself why I keep showing up." That night, Leah Ramirez pinned a photo of Mallory on her bulletin board. Underneath, a note: "Ask the questions anyway." She wasn't done, but she was ready. And this time, she wasn't alone. If this story hit home for you, take a second to subscribe. Stories like these matter, not just because they show what's broken, but because they remind us what's still worth fighting for.